You alright? I thought this week we could look up into the skies, the stratosphere, maybe as far as the atmosphere, maybe. Probably, yeah. Yeah, we'll go as far as the atmosphere as well. Not quite to the reaches of space, but certainly, past the clouds. Now, there's always been these things known to us as invisible flying monsters. Could they be the Greys' mind manipulation machines? Could they be massive big fuck off jellyfish that fly through the sky? That's certainly what I remember them being about when I used to read about them on the internet in the past. But maybe, after doing this research, maybe the true conspiracy here is the washing away of the facts about these elusive creatures. Are invisible monsters proof of an erasure of fact and or fiction from the websites that they used to be pasted and plastered all across? Or is the memory of reading about them simply a figment of my imagination? Most of I suppose we'd call it the surface level internet stuff seems relatively recent, like 2023 onwards, and it just seems to claim that it's just insects being caught on camera. It's a bloody moth. But we've all seen loads of films with bugs flying around and documentaries about clouds that we got shown at school, and then there's even documentaries about insects. Do you know what I mean? We don't see these creatures. We see a moth. We clearly see moths on videos. Moths don't turn into invisible flying monsters. Do you know what I mean? That isn't what they look like. A moth looks like a moth on camera. Always seems to have done as well. So, bit dubious going into it. Do you know what I mean? We don't see these. Well, they look, to give you an idea, they look a bit dragon-like, long, snaking through the sky, multiple legs, like someone's gotten maybe a millipede and rolled a rolling pin over it and then stuck loads of your missus's eyelashes to the side, basically. That's kind of what they look like. So just for now, that's what you can imagine flitting around in the air. I mean, you could always Google image it, but then you might ruin the show doing that. Let me describe it to you. Let me build it, mate. Like, are we some people have said in the past, it seems, that these were what dragons were. I find that hard to believe, even from all my research. Even before St. George killed them all and battered them, do you know what I mean? He was like a win for the English kind of thing. But even before that, mate, I don't think this is what people thought dragons were. That seems like someone's just tacked that on there, been like, claim it was dragons, because people don't believe in dragons anymore, so we'll just say it was like them. Are we really being led to believe that these massive creatures that never land, like some form of fucking mystical or magical albatross, are just a trick of the light, a trick of frame rates? We've all got camera phones, innit? And if this is to be believed, we'd all be filming these so-called creatures at night time when we aim our phones to the sky, because that's when a lot of people nowadays, modern scientists say, oh, you can only film them at night time because of the way the light reflects off them and the camera doesn't have the frame rate to catch up with them in the sky. So you get, a dragonfly can fly 30 centimetres in the shutter of a lens. And you're like, no, shut up. What are you on about? It just seems too convenient of a truth, do you know what I mean? And you could take pictures of them. They're saying you could just go in the security light in your backyard and set the sensor off, take a picture of the sky, and you'll see loads of them. But except you won't, because phone cameras don't take pictures of them anymore, which is suspicious again. But I've never recorded one. I've took loads of videos, loads of pictures, things of the sky. Took pictures of that. Never seen them. Have you? You watching this or listening to this? Maybe you're watching it live on Patreon, or the recording of it live on Patreon. Think to yourself, have you ever seen this live in real life? Do you know, the fucking bugs stretching out in the sky into massive long bugs? No, you haven't, 'cause it's fucking nonsense. Hopefully, we're going to be able to find out the truth behind the rarely seen, hard to describe, invisible flying monsters. Now, I do have a reasonably clear memory of sky jellyfish. Not as seeing them myself, but seeing videos and reports of them all over the internet. I tend to lean towards a lot of it being Russian footage, I think, from the language that I remember seeing on it, and the what would you call it, the captions, I suppose, on it, looking like you're watching, a weirdly ported Toy Story 3 online kind of thing, that sort of alphabet. But the videos were everywhere, and it's been a couple years since I've had to research stuff for these shows, because now I'm recording them in 2025, as I've said in the previous show. I'm not going to bring that up every time, but you'll notice there's probably a difference in the style of the show and the way I am. But maybe as I do these week by week, I'll start to really fucking get back into it and get a fucking voice that's clear again within it. But speaking about being clear, I couldn't find any clear stories about sky jellyfish anywhere. Fuck all. I looked on Reddit, didn't see very much. If there's something I'm missing, let me know in the comments, whether on Spotify or YouTube, wherever you're listening to it, let me know. But I couldn't find anything about them, really. Nothing of interest, nothing that you could really report back to you about, which I find really fucking strange, almost like I've made them up entirely, which I know that I haven't. It almost seems like, going back to the censorship point, it seems like it's become an awful lot harder now to use. Google is what I tend to use, but it seems a lot harder to use it without the first 4 or so pages just being websites that can be advertised on, websites that are amalgamations of things scraped from other websites. Where have all the forums gone? These forums that I love, that I used to go on all the time, and that for some reason now I can't remember the name of, for a start, which pisses me off, because I don't know how I can forget the names to these things that I used to use all the time and be on every other day looking at them. Also, by typing in what I think is the name of it and anything close to the name of it and the topics covered in them forums, I can't fucking find them anywhere. Very annoying. Very, very irritating. Don't know why I can't get to them. But hopefully I'll find, because I've got to have it written down in my sources for one of these shows. Also, a side note, the sources for this show, you'll find them in the description below. I thought maybe if you want to have a little read on this, see where I've got this information from, you can have a little look there. I'm just putting together what I can find on the internet for you about stuff that I think's interesting, which you might go and have a look into, do you know what I mean? But as I said, maybe we'll lean into the censorship here and there, see what that's about, but we'll see where it takes us. The first thing we need to know about IFMs, Invisible Flying Monsters, they got multiple forms, mate. Or there's multiple genus, multiple species of them. The most common one seems to have been something called a sky rod, right? And like I said, there's also the jellyfish type creature that seems to resemble some form of spacecraft. And then you've even got the sky whales and a type of sentient fog. But we're getting well ahead of ourselves here. So let's start with the sky rods. These themselves, they've got a few names, which I think makes them much harder to trust, really. Like when your mate Bill gets called Billy, Will, and William by his different friendship groups, you know what I mean? Like, who are you, Bill? Like, who's the real Bill? Who's the real person? In a similar vein to Billy, I suppose, we've got Skyfish, which feels like the informal name that maybe he's called by his little sister and his childhood friends, people that have known him since he was like 4 or 5, because that's what they called him them. Then we got Bill, which I guess is air rod. These are the air rods now, introducing you to the idea. Ladies and gentlemen, the brand new air rod. The new and improved air rod. That's like what the family probably call him. Mum, dad, cousins and that. You know what family is. Then you've got solar entities. Now, in my eyes, that's William. That's William of the Bills. That's the name his teachers and boss use, or the name his parents use, where, and like they catch him doing weird shit like putting, like underwear on the dog and threatening to kiss it for a practice. Do you know what I mean? Like, solar entities, solar entities, what the fuck are you doing with my bra on that fucking greyhound? Do you know what I mean? Because that's insulting to your mum if you do that, because it's insinuating that she doesn't need a very big bra, because you're not going to get a very big bra on a greyhound, are you? It's going to look ridiculous. You want a nice little petite thing on a greyhound. You can't do that with your mum's bra because your mum's got massive tits. Do you know what I mean? Like, think about it now. Sit there now and have a think about your mum's tits, right? Bigger than what you'd put on a greyhound, innit? So you're just insulting her. There, well, Bill's insulting her. William, solar entities even is insulting her. That's just an example of, out of nowhere. Either way. Well, I suppose if we got to use the boss line, though, maybe when the boss wants to embarrass them in front of the rest of the work office, I mean, I've never worked in an office, but since the William debacle, we've had to introduce cameras above everyone's workstations and introduce a new system to the toilet roll dispenser where you have to scan your lanyard badge to the dispenser to get more sheets of toilet roll than the new AI toilet predicts you need from this built-in rim reading device. Also, Please direct your fury to Margaret for why you can't eat on the floor in the main office now, since she introduced ants to the room from her biscuit crumbs. You know, just as an example, because like Margaret can be Peggy, can't it? I've been watching King of the Hill, guys. Margaret can be Peggy as well. Maggie, Peggy, Peg, Marge as well. You know, loads of names from Margaret. But like Gerrit would be a mint name, but you wouldn't know if they were a man or woman, innit? You wouldn't be able to guess. Someone says they're coming for a job named Gerrit, you'd be like, Gerrit? I'm going to guess a bloke, and then in walks your mum. Half her tits out. You're like, Mum, what you doing here with them massive boobs? Everyone's like, she looks like a fucking greyhound, lad. Do you know what I mean? Fucking embarrassing then for you as the boss as well. Speaking of ants, though, I did bring up ants, and that was on purpose. The ants appear because there's crumbs in it. That's why there's ants in this office. And they survive off them crumbs. So we need to think about what these solar entities would really be eating, because there's nothing in the air that's edible for tiny mouth monsters to munch on, right? Wrong, mate. Fucking wrong. According to scientists, maybe, I don't know if it's scientists, because they sort of support the idea of invisible flying monsters accidentally, but the sky itself seems to be full, absolutely full to the brim of microscopic bacteria and something called sky fungi, little airborne mushrooms that flit around in the sky, presumably all communicating amongst themselves, plotting our demise, or at least some form of like self-defense method they can use, like they do in forests when you start hacking down trees and they all start texting each other being like, fucking hell, it's fucking risky over here, boys. And it could be that we never hear about mushrooms flying around chatting to each other because they're all so small that we can't see them, and they possibly communicate in a secret way that we can't even measure. And that's something that the governments of the world wouldn't want us to learn about, because people might start getting ideas then in their heads about how they could communicate amongst themselves without the rest of the world knowing. And that would be far too clandestine for our modern world to cope with. So again, you know, a little bit of censorship there coming into this. Saying that though, right, about the fungus and stuff, these sky fish, they're sneaky little bastards, because they're invisible to the naked eye. But all you need, right, to be able to see them is a 30-year-old camera, and you seem to be able to see thousands of them. Some modern security cameras as well. There was some news articles in, I think in Gloucester, but it kind of felt like it was like a veiled advert in a way, but it like hard to quite pin down what the point of that story was, in my opinion. But these security cameras seem to be able to pick them up now, but not really phone cameras and things like that. And you've got to think, a security camera's pretty cheaply made, they don't cost very much, so maybe it's old tech being used in them. But there haven't really been many sightings by human eye that I've found in all my research. It seems like they were in everybody's, what do you call that, a pouch packet? You know, like when you used to go to the chemist and give them the roll of film. They would have done it when I was a kid. And then you get the pictures back in that pack. A pack of pictures, we'll call it a pack of pictures from the chemist. But it seems like the hurried production of modern camera technology could have been propelled by the repeated sightings of these otherworldly monsters that scientists refuse to acknowledge, flat out refuse to acknowledge they exist. Modern scientists claim that it's nothing more than the frame rate of a camera being too slow to get a flying moth in a shot, and then it produces these, well, like I said before, I guess, multi-legged flatworms. That's what they kind of look like. Really long moths, and sometimes they even look like shrimp meat. Now, you might be wondering why these atmospheric funguses aren't collecting in the air due to that scientific phenomena that we covered in Truth Seeking years ago called mass aggregation, which, for those of you that haven't listened to Truth Seeking, please go and listen to it. It's a separate podcast series. It's probably much funnier than this. Now, mass aggregation, the way that works is specific types of condoms in the oceans, and we're also taught as well that plastic bottles of each type of plastic bottle, they all gather together separately in our oceans in separate little islands. But for some reason, this doesn't seem to work with mushrooms in the stratosphere. So who are we to believe here? We may never know. We may never know who to believe. Maybe that's an avenue that we don't need to go down. But one thing that might stop these stealthy little caps from grouping together in the sky is a creature that possibly consumes them. Now, if you think about our seas, similar creatures to what's in these little micro fungus colonies, if you like, would probably be phytoplankton, mate. We're back on the shrimp. And they're eaten en masse by giant monsters known as whales. We're heading towards shrimp again. So it seems more than reasonable to believe, shrimp, that a similarly sized creature could be travelling around the skies like a sky whale, hoovering up all this microbacteria and fungus, right? But though, we would be overlooking something by just assuming there's a skyscraper-sized sea mammals that have specifically been adapted to survive the harsh borders of space, wouldn't we? Maybe there'd be an intermediary. Something that sucks up all the fungus and then gets sucked up by the whales, maybe, to make the whales' lives a bit easier. It'd probably take a lot of energy, wouldn't it, to keep a blue whale-sized, possibly naturally cloaking creature in the air. What if they were eating something a little bit more grounded in reality, instead of floating fungus? What if, like their marine counterparts, these sky whales were eating shrimp? Now, it just so happens that these sky rods that I mentioned before look an awful lot like a type of so-called ancient prehistoric shrimp. And for me personally, I don't know about you, dear listener, but it seems perfectly plausible that there's a type of shrimp that instead of being hydrodynamic, became aerodynamic and began to thrive in the skies, continuing their legacy as the apex predator they were once known as in prehistory. It almost makes sense as well that if a measly shrimp was once the world's first apex predator, then surely, at least to me, it makes sense that a similar creature would follow a similar evolutionary path to become the first apex predator of the clouds. It is very possible that the reason that they've been so successful because they fly too fast for the naked eye to see, so we never knew they were there. We didn't know to look for them. We didn't know to be scared of these sky shrimp, right? We had no idea. Like, where do you look? You can't even see them. Not even a blur, mate. Until we developed cameras, mass-produced cameras, and then there's a bit of an issue. And that's why it worked on old cameras as well. They were mass-produced. We didn't know the risks involved in using old cameras. Like how they say with the old Polaroid Spectre, that could capture extra-dimensional entities and ghosts on film. Maybe they changed the way that the camera works, or maybe altered the glass. You know, like the old the conspiracies around Diocene or something, maybe something along those sort of lines, in order to specifically filter out the crustaceans. This could help explain why cats, and even occasionally your dog, might seem to watch invisible items flit around your living room, and maybe even why they seem to slowly be tiptoeing towards getting rid of our cats and dogs. We're becoming far too aware of the aerial prawns around us. Also, just, you know, it isn't wasted on me to learn that a shrimp was the world's first apex predator. And that does feel like vindication for one of my earliest ever episodes. I did Crustration Frustration, which you might enjoy. Also, whilst I'm mentioning, you know, old episodes, if you want more episodes, join me Patreon for £3, mate. You get loads more episodes. You can download all my books included within that £3. But even if you can't do that, right, just leave us a comment on the shows that you do listen to and rate the shows on whatever app you're listening to, because that helps more people find me. And find me on Instagram as well for this, at World Around You's pod, separate to World Around You. I'm trying to grow a separate page for it with a little bit of slightly different content on, less dead rat stuff and more just like gibberish, I suppose. Anyway, these shrimp have a name, mate, these ancient shrimp, and it's really hard to pronounce, and I'm probably going to keep changing the pronunciation through the show. Anomalocaris, Anomalocaris, which literally translates to, drum roll, that's me motorboating your mum's tits, unlike any other shrimp. Now, if that isn't suspicious to you, I don't know if this is the show for you, mate, because to me, that pretty much admits to me that they can fly, because no other shrimp can fly. These are unlike other shrimp. Boom. But I thought I'd look into them, and I'd try to get a better understanding of the skyfish. These massive shrimp that, even according to scientists, aren't like any other shrimp, can measure up to 51 centimetres if you include these fucking pair of mad tendrils in the tail. but for some reason they just measure the body to make it seem less intimidating and smaller. So maybe that also helps to make it more difficult to categorize one if you happen to see it fly past your bedroom window. So with the body discounting the tail and the tendrils, it works out about 38 centimeters, maybe a little bit below 37.7, I think it was 37.8 centimeters on average, which is still over a foot in length. That's still a fucking hefty prawn. It's about the size of your average cat, I'd say, about a foot in it. Now, these things have been discovered all around the world as well, which, again, suspicious. It's quite a distribution of them, which is a bit, why are they everywhere? How have they got everywhere? Why are shrimp, these same massive, giant shrimp everywhere that no one's ever heard of that might be flying around in the sky? Should they be everywhere? And could they be getting discovered mostly because of the mud flood that's alleged to have occurred? But I don't want to get into the mud flood right now. Maybe we'll cover the mud flood in a future episode. They just, for those of you that don't know what the mud flood is, the world got covered in mud. That's where fossils may come from. Who knows? We've got to look into it. But if there was a huge landslide, right, you've got to imagine that landslide would be able to catch some flying prawns within it and, quote, fossilise them to make them look really old, even though they may have only been recently plucked out of the sky by the mud floating around on the ground. Do you know what I mean? Now, scientists, modern-day scientists, have openly admitted, right, that these shrimp have been repeatedly misidentified. And if you want to be on the lookout for one yourself next time you're flying abroad, or maybe you're high up in a block of flats, you're looking for something that looks very similar to Anorith from Pokemon. One of the Pokemon fossils that was in Ruby and Sapphire. The one that looks like a coral or a plant, it's not that one. It's the one that looks like a little bug. Just if you want to help visualise what these look like. I would say they probably aren't blue as well, but then when you think about it, blue would be the perfect camouflage for a predatory shrimp that survives by sneaking up on fungus in the sky. So we'll probably keep it blue in your mind's eye just for now. Probably not bright red eyes though. Now, could they keep changing the identity of these creatures to help it fit in with modern science as science evolves? Or have they actually been finding out new information about them as time goes by? Who cares, right? Who gives a fuck? They were discovered as a fossil in 1886, and then they were found all around the world. They seem to have been found in Australia, North America, China. I said earlier as well that scientists claim that they look unlike any other shrimp, and that's because of their tail, or what they call the Europod. Not as in like what you'd get as to go to France. It starts with a U instead of an E. But anyway, the Europod, unsurprisingly, that's where its arsehole is, which I find it very strange that whenever you look up the word Europod, everywhere wants to tell you that Europod means it's where the anus is the term that they use. As if you're going to read, unlike any other shrimp, eh? Maybe they don't shit downwards. Maybe they push it out the shoulder. Maybe they just squeeze it out of where a human would have its Adam's apple. Maybe it comes out the end of their hands. Maybe it comes out of the wrist like Spider-Man. Do you know what I mean? It's like they're treating us like fucking idiots. So that's why I've got some feelings towards scientists. Do you know what I mean? The way that they seem to write about science. They just seem to massively underestimate the reader's intelligence, in my opinion, Now, before we do get into more about the shrimp itself, I think it's very important to understand the world of 1886. The most notable event of 1886 is clearly the patenting of the first automobile. So the automobile, for those of you that are maybe a bit slow, maybe a bit thick, that means car, effectively. So that's a machine that can be easily transported, made almost purposely to expel dangerous gases that can change the atmosphere, maybe even purposely to attack the creatures in the sky, to try and either knock them down a peg or just to try and bring them crashing down to earth whilst they suffocate on these new fumes. Adding to this, the process of manufacturing aluminium was invented in 1886, which again is very suspicious when you take into account skyfish, because aluminium's something that would eventually be used to invade the skies, the very habitat of all these mysterious invisible flying monsters. Then you've got the first alternating current power plant in the world being opened in America, which means the aluminium can get churned out easier, I imagine, using electricity, I guess, which it's good. It makes more jobs, I suppose, in some ways, but it also creates a possible electromagnetic field or before this unseen disturbance to the quote air, I suppose. I don't know what you would call what electricity moves around in frequency. I don't know what you would call it, but that possibly would disturb or at least interrupt the flight of all these lofty shrimp, because it can probably affect birds. I imagine if you blast the fucking budgie with EMF, it's gonna fuck up the budgie. The budgie's not gonna fly properly for a while, is it? So, imagine what it's doing to the shrimp that can fly around past the clouds. Freud, as well, the psychoanalyst, he opened his first practice in Austria, which is perfect. That's perfect, mate, because that's going to be helpful with brainwashing people into not believing in the sky shrimp in the first place that keep falling out the sky because of the new electricity, possibly, and all the car fumes going out there. And speaking of cocaine, the first Coca-Cola was produced, which would be a great way to wait for the future, because then you can look back and you can easily discredit any eyewitness testimony, because more and more people would have been under the influence of cocaine back then. And now, right, it gets even more interesting, because there was a volcano in New Zealand which erupted called Tarawera on June 10th, right, which I think released or at least interacted with pink and white calcium carbonate around the volcano. I don't know if it got expelled into the sky, but it at least reacted with it. You imagine you heat it up, it's going to burn it and put them fumes into the sky. Now that pink and white calcium carbonate is something that can be found in fossils. But as we saw in 2010, when that Icelandic volcano erupted, the whole world was affected by that. All of air travel, all the skies, everyone's cars covered in shite. So it's safe to assume that this eruption may have interacted with the sky around the world. Also, I did mention before that a fossilised shrimp was discovered in Australia, so what if this volcano was directly responsible for Han Soloing a few dozen air crustaceans and brought them crashing down to Earth, which I imagine like the weight of a presumably muscular 50-odd centimetre shrimp completely encased in volcanic ash and calcium carbonate would surely pierce the Earth anyway, ready to be discovered by paleontologists, conveniently, maybe, a few months later, a year down the line. And even more to that effect, what if the Han Soloing took a little longer to affect the shrimp, and the air currents could direct the calcified prawns to a particular part of the world in the jet stream, if you like, and what if the new electromagnetic frequencies of the power plants of the USA could drag some of that volcanic ash particles towards its landmass, and a school of rockified shrimp crashing down to Earth is what caused the first recorded earthquake in America on August 31st. Possible, innit? Who's to say it's not? Even more so, what if the luckier shrimp were able to stay below the volcanic ash, and maybe, because of the electromagnetic field in the sky, they were forced to fly much lower to the ground, or maybe there was some form of reconnaissance group of advanced shrimp sent to scout out what's happening in America, and those shrimp could have been possibly directly responsible for a gentleman called Steve Brody managing to survive a 135-foot fall from the Brooklyn Bridge, and because they just simply broke his fall on the way down, or maybe as an act of kindness or diplomacy towards the humans, they thought, fucking hell, we'll help him. He can't survive this. He's not a fucking magical 50-centimetre shrimp. Do you know what I mean? He's a fully grown bloke. He'll die. Because I'm not saying they're evil. And who's to say as well that, like, speaking of evil, who's to say that these stratospheric shrimp sightings could have possibly had a hand in Spain abolishing slavery in Cuba on October 7th? A sort of, fucking hell, we've got bigger problems on our hands. Or, in maybe a Project Bluebeam sort of way, it brought about that sort of proposed humanity in the Spanish that hadn't been previously seen. Who knows? Just spitballing ideas, things that happened and why that might be important. Perhaps, though, maybe, in my eyes, the weirdest coincidence that ties all of this together is Arthur Conan Doyle getting his first Sherlock Holmes book story published that year. I think it was in December. Because quite a lot of people, especially online, associate Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, with the invention of a species of flying monster known as the sky jellyfish. albeit that was a lot later, 1913, in his book called The Horror of the Heights, but still a weird coincidence that he gets his first Sherlock Holmes story published, and in 1886 they start finding these shrimp and sky monsters, potentially. But that's enough. That's enough about 1886. Now you can see why these shrimp seem, so plausible as the real sky rods. And seeing as though I've just mentioned the sky jellyfish again, it seems very relevant now to tell you that the first mouth fossils of these Anomalocaris, the shrimp, were misidentified as prehistoric jellyfish mouths. Both of them seem to be a creature that can survive in the sky, the flying jellyfish, the flying shrimp. They seem to have an almost identical mouth structure, at least according to what I've put together from my research on the internet, which, is that a coincidence? Probably not. Speaking of coincidences, though, these particular shrimp... Question for the audience. How many trunk flaps do you reckon these have? Basing any mention of a number off all the old shows, a number that props its head up in any conspiracy theory, how many trunk flaps do they have? If you guessed 13, boys and girls, spot on. Supposedly, as well, it was always 13 flaps. Always. Which, I just find it bizarre that 13 is involved in so many conspiracy theories. It's so weird. It's there. Like, that was the only number, really, in the whole thing, apart from 1886, obviously, from my research, that was mentioned, and it was mentioned as a definite. But, I mean, that's to do with the shrimp, and no one else on the internet really is suggesting that these shrimp are sky rods. That's me suggesting that. But still, odd that number 13 would write. Anyway, I can't remember as well if we covered it in the if you ever listened to the Reich Here, Reich Now episode, but some of the alleged Nazi tech in that, that I read about for that, they proposed that they should use cones as an anti-gravitational propulsion device, right? And weirdly, the mouths of these shrimp and some jellyfish, they've got cones for mouths, which I suppose in a certain way, in a certain light, could be something that could potentially help them stay aloft. Another little coincidence that adds a bit of weight to my theory that the shrimp are perfectly evolved as well to live in the sky here. Apparently, all they could eat, soft-bodied prey. Now, apparently, a lot of shrimp used to eat trilobites, but these shrimp only seem to eat soft-bodied prey. And, I mean, you've got to use your imagination to imagine what sky fungus might feel like, but in my imagination, it's pretty soft. Have you ever seen a hard mushroom? Even when a mushroom goes mouldy, it gets softer, gunkier, gooier, stickier, wetter, softer. Perfect for a flying shrimp to consume meat. We can even tie in now, I just mentioned trilobites, we can even tie in the coevolution. For those of you that don't know what coevolution is, think about the episode of Futurama where they're trying to explain, I think it's a toad and a snake battling, and they keep evolving in different ways to be able to kill each other and survive each other. Now, bear that in mind. The Anomalocaris and the woodlouse. This really old shrimp, right, is thought to be responsible for trilobites evolving to have that special ability of rolling up into a ball to be able to prevent this type of particular shrimp from cracking them in half to be able to get the soft meat under the shells. Now, think about the modern day woodlice, roly-polies, as kids might call them. We don't have any land shrimp. We don't have them. So, that land shrimp, preposterous, mental. You never heard of it. When have you ever heard of a land shrimp? Nonsense. So why did a woodlice need to be able to roll up into a ball? Maybe it's to stop the sky prawns from killing them. But you can take it one step further, mate. Woodlice, they're always hiding underneath things. And from this, we can easily theorise that these shrimp don't have either the strength or brain power or intelligence or telekinesis to be able to move rocks and logs. Or maybe they don't have the mental capacity to think about moving the logs to look for a woodlouse to eat. They just went, fucking hell, all the trilobites have disappeared. Everywhere's just full of balls and these rocks and logs now. I'll take to the mushrooms. They just become vegan out of the blue, out of nowhere. Maybe all of this is vegan propaganda. Who knows? Maybe we're being affected right now to think maybe we should eat mushrooms instead of bugs, instead of woodlice. Maybe I shouldn't eat an animal that's spent millions of years to evolve into be able to survive itself from a predator that by all accounts, doesn't even exist anymore, is ancient, prehistoric, extinct meat. Why do they need to roll up into a ball? I don't get it though. You can even go a little bit further, right? The shrimp clearly might have possibly, who knows, maybe evolved to be able to fly, right? Woodlice never did. Woodlice don't have wings. Woodlice don't take to the skies. All the ones that did mutate to have wings were obviously easily picked off by the shrimp, and they didn't evolve and survive and pass on the genetics that often. Or when they curled into the defensive ball while they were in the sky to, not get attacked by the shrimp, they all just plummeted to their death, splattered on the ground, mate. That's the sky rods explained, though. But what about all the others? There's quite a few other monsters. You got the jellyfish, the whales. I can't be too sure, right, about the whales. There's not a great deal of stuff about the whales. Obviously, you've got the things in that film where they're like, don't forget to bring a towel, where you got the dolphins, the sky dolphins, and the sky whales. The one about 42 and the satellites in the sky for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Fucking hell, that was hard to get to the name of that. But I did find out some stuff about an invisible flying monster. A group of invisible flying monsters known as atmospheric beasts, right? And even a named cryptid that hides in the skies as well. But I suppose first, we're going to need to understand what an atmospheric beast is, really. Now, atmospheric beast-wise, there's a strong belief in some circles that your average atmospheric beast hails from the space between planets, outer space, the Milky Way. I don't know what you call the gaps between planets is space, but the planets are in space as well. So the bits in between planets, if you imagine the vastness in between planets and stars is the road between towns, these atmospheric beasts come from the road, right? They're road beasts, sky road beasts, space road beasts, maybe. Then, anyway, the people who believe that, though, the people that believe, because that's what all of this is me looking at what people believe, do you know what I mean? There's what's mint about it, innit? Because people are mental, right? So there's an argument amongst atmospheric beast believers that some people believe they come from the gaps between planets, and then other people seem to argue with them people about ones that apparently come from planets with thicker atmospheres, like Venus. We covered Venus in a Patreon episode very recently from this book I've been reading on there. And people believe that there's a thicker atmosphere on Venus where some creatures and plants would be able to thrive in that atmosphere well away from the surface of Venus, basically. Nothing to do with Val Valiant Thor. Completely disregards the concept of Venusians and Hollow Venus, the Hollow Venusian civilizations. Completely disregards all of that, which I find mental, because that's like a linchpin of conspiracy, Val Valiant Thor. So the idea that you just disregard that and go, no, there's none of that. What it's actually full of is sky jellyfish. Mental. But there's a crossover belief as well. Smaller, but a crossover nonetheless. If there was a Venn diagram, right? Let's think back to your mum's tits, right? Venn diagram. Your mum, because she's very well endowed, she pushes them together. That line of her tits touching in the middle, very short. That very short line of your mum's breast meat touching, sweating against themselves, right? Very small. These people believe that these monsters can exist in those dense atmospheres, and then they can move out into space, float through the galaxy until they approach another planet where they'll survive again. And they can survive in space. Now, I'm not sure what they eat in space. There's no evidence for that. There's nothing online I could find about that. But, I mean, I can easily imagine there's something edible for flying invisible monsters as they hurtle through space. Why not? Or maybe it's that they enter some form of stasis, maybe, in order to survive. Like, they naturally cryogenically freeze themselves or something, and then they turn back into their regular, almost gaseous self when they re-enter an atmosphere. But I'm only thinking that because we're told that space is freezing cold, but then we're also told the sun's really hot when the sun's not a planet. The sun's just gas in space. So that passes through space. There's the radiation in space as well, which, if people pass through that, it gives them mad superpowers, like they can set themselves on fire, turn invisible, stretch, become a rock man. Do you know what I mean? There's loads of conflating. Is that the word? Beliefs. But let's pretend that we just don't know what the ambient temperature of open space is and how that would affect an undocumented alien. You know, we'll settle on that. And personally, I wouldn't want to try and guess it. I'm not in any position to try and guess it and make it up, or I'm not here to mislead you. Do you know what I mean? I'd rather deal in what we know and what we can find out. And what we do know is they appear to have the power to control their own density. That's density, not destiny. You know, this isn't me going all soft and cartoony on you. Oh, the fog monster controls its own destiny. No, it doesn't. It controls its density. They can make themselves lighter or heavier, denser, to be able to properly navigate the new environment that they find themselves in. So I suppose maybe if we take the third group of beliefs, the small line of titty meat, and believe that, maybe they'd lower the density and really speed up to be able to travel as fast as they can towards the outer edge of a planet's atmosphere, and then become really heavy at the last possible point so that they hurtle through space at a best speed and maybe a better aimed direction, possibly. I don't know if that's how it would work. I imagine it would. But saying that, a rocket ship has to be pretty heavy as it goes. But I bet if they could make a rocket ship lighter on its approach to the edge of the atmosphere, they probably would. Why don't they just fill rocket ships with helium so they can all be like, Houston, we're almost there, Houston. And then they just deplete the helium, fill it back with oxygen. They've all got the suits on, though, I suppose, so they wouldn't even be breathing in the helium. They'd just be going, Houston, because they've all got deep voices in it, because they're all so masculine astronauts. They're not just sat in a warehouse somewhere pretending to, you know, love their family and miss their family, even though they're like 20 minutes down the road, allegedly. Anyway, I've gotten really off track here. So the idea that they could hurtle themselves off the planet by becoming heavier, maybe. But I don't know. Who am I to guess at the aliens of the aliens and their behaviours? Do you know what I mean? I'm not a biologist. I'm not an exobiologist. You know, I'm not even what would you call it? Indo-biologist? Was that what we'll start calling biologists of Earth? Terran biologists, maybe? Terror biologists. I don't know what we would call them. But whilst in our atmosphere, these atmospheric beasts have been seen to act like clouds, mimicking the shape and colour of clouds, even mimicking the movements of clouds through the sky, contorting almost to the whims of the wind, mate. The perfect disguise of clouds. And they even have this ability to release a liquid and direct it towards people, which you've got to imagine must be downwards, because it's not very often that people are above the clouds. So some of them have also been reported to have mouths, eyes, flippers, and that they can travel through the sky faster than the speed of fog, right? Which I think is a great line. That's just a hell of a thing to read. Fog just disappears though, doesn't it? Or it dries out, or it gets like sucked back up into the clouds. Honestly, I'm not really sure where fog goes. So I did do a little Google of that. And it appears that fog as we know it is unable to control its own density. And that means it's directly impacted by the sun because it's liquid, it's moisture. And that makes the water within the fog evaporate and go upwards as it becomes lighter again. And this is something that an atmospheric beast can do at will. A very, very clear distinction between the two. The regular fog, the cloud fog, that doesn't control its own density. The sun controls its density. An atmospheric beast controls its own density, becomes heavier, becomes lighter at whim. And somehow we know that, which I think's mint, that someone's worked that out. Now, I'm unsure. I've got no idea what an atmospheric beast survives on. I couldn't find any evidence for that. I don't know what they eat. Don't know what they eat, what they survive on. But some of the research seems to suggest that they can transform chemicals in the atmosphere into some sort of sustenance for itself, I suppose. Like how a plant turns dirt into leaves, if you like. But we do know, what we do know, though, about atmospheric beasts, categorically, they're not immortal. So they can survive space travel. They can turn particles in the air into food. They can survive the distance involved in space travel. But they do die. And they die in our atmosphere for some reason. And there's been loads of evidence of their deaths for generations. It's to the point there's been so many of them die that there seems to be cultural references throughout time, throughout the world, of these monsters' demise. That the main name for the end product is Welsh as well, and it's a word I'm probably going to butcher. Pwedite. Let's Llangollen Pwedese, like that. PWDRE space SER is the name of it, which if you translate it to English means rock from the stars. But these limp jelly bodies, they've got names all around the world like gelatinous meteorites and star jelly, both of which sound like they'd be quite cheap sweets from a petrol station, and you probably wouldn't want to eat them, but you might get them for your nephew or your niece or your mate's kid who's waiting in the car with your mate. Do you know what I mean? Just as a nice little, give these a try, because you want to try one, but you don't want a full bag of them, because you know they're going to be rank, but maybe you like trying shit foods. Now, the Welsh name, that apparently gets used elsewhere in the world as well, which I find really bizarre, because I can't think of any other Welsh terms that have been adopted in other countries. Like the most famous one's probably rarebit, I think, which is cheese on toast, I think. But outside of that, I don't think there's much else. Now, across the border from Wales in England, these atmospheric beasts are called the boneless. It's a type of animate frog, like a living frog, basically. It's very hard not to say frog, and I am saying fog, F-O-G, fog. One of these fogs has been known to harass cyclists and policemen, which, make of that what you will. And when, I think it was the policeman, or maybe the cyclist, that said when he did interact with the fog, he said it smelled like mildew. He's on record saying it smelled like mildew, and it left like a greasy feel to him. Then in the Shetland Isles as well, it's got another name. It's just simply called It with a capital I, which is pretty ominous, very ominous. But fog itself is ominous, shapeless. But, in the same way, it's all-consuming, covers everything, gets everywhere, edgeless. The perfect name, really, is It. What's that? It. It's out there again. It's there. Look at it. Look at it. Like that. Look at it. Well, it'd be Scottish, though, wouldn't it? I suppose the Shetland Isles, I think. Scottish, aye. Oh, hello. Oh, hello. Scottish. 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 Is that Scottish? Look at it. I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? Terrible accents. It all just sounds like me doing a voice, innit? I've confused myself as well there. Oh, apparently, there's some scientists as well that were working for National Geographic Society, and they tested the so-called star jelly, and it did come back with no known DNA. Now, some other scientists like to claim that it's leftover frog spawn, but I think it seems perfectly plausible. Is that the right word? Perfectly plausible? Perfectly possible? Perfectly plausible that some of this, tadpoleless frog spawn gloop, right, could be tadpoleless frog spawn gloop, and some of it could be star jelly. They've not tested the same chunk at the same time. The two different scientists haven't gone, you do your test, I'll do mine. Do you know what I mean? They're separate pieces of gunk. Now, imagine if think about leaves. Loads of leaves look similar. But if you test a leaf from an oak tree in one country and then test it against an oak tree in another, probably going to get slightly different results. Just like these guys have got slightly different results. One of them said there's no DNA in that whatsoever. The other guy's gone, there's DNA in that of a toad. Slightly different. Now, I also remember as well, I don't know if you've seen it on Netflix, I don't remember what the TV show was called, probably should have made a note of it, but there was a program where they talked about piles of jelly appearing on the ground, falling from the sky in America somewhere, and then it started disappearing not long after. Just like this stuff from the dead fog monsters, the Pwedese, if you like, but in Welsh. I promised you a cryptid though, didn't I, earlier on, and here's one for you. Now, whilst not strictly an invisible flying monster, it seems to at least have the capacity for invisibility, because it wasn't always visible in the sky. Otherwise, they would have always been scared of it, or they wouldn't have been scared of it at all because they'd just be used to it, and they'd probably have just given it a name like, oh, that's Scary Dave. He picks off a child every now and then, so we leave a couple daft ones in the field and let him have his choice. But they didn't do that, mate. Instead, it seems to have scared the shit out of an entire town on and off for a few nights. So the cryptid dates back as far as, from what I can tell, 1891, and we've even got a date and a location, mate. September 5th in Indiana, America, and it's known as the Crawfordsville Monster, which implies we've even got a more localised address, mate, of somewhere that you can only assume is called Crawfordsville. Often depicted in illustrations completely different to its description as well, this monster, which is a bit weird. The people who draw it always seem to draw a massive purple-headed, one-eyed monster, which is a bit, even for me, that's a bit too low-hanging of a fruit, you know what I mean? I'm not going to... But it did seem to have one big eye and a big tubey body, right? Everyone agrees on that. Now imagine, if you like, to imagine what this looks like. Imagine a massive flying worm, but without wings. It's got a huge fucking glowing red eyeball as well at the end of it. Maybe the odd bit of teeth around it, but that wasn't unanimous amongst the descriptions. There's no obvious face or head, just a massive fuck-off eye. Then its body has got fins down its side and on the top and bottom, but it's also got a sort of feathery tail, which is nice because that's this episode's first mention of the feathery serpent-style creature, which, if we had some bells or a klaxon, I imagine that would go off. Probably should go off for 13 as well, I imagine. Now, that feathery serpent is something that also raises its head a lot in my research. But though, ignoring that, we've got eyes on the ground, and we've got the names of the eyes on the ground, the witnesses, credible witnesses as well, religious folk. Now, I know what you're thinking. You think I'm being sarcastic because they're religious, but in my eyes, a Methodist preacher and his wife probably wouldn't really want to encourage the belief in cryptids or monsters and 20 feet long, 8 foot wide sky eels, you know. It just seems like it wouldn't be good for business. Maybe, in a way, maybe it'd incite fear, but a creature like that probably seems pretty ungodly, so I would have thought it would push more people to science or at least atheism, rather than get you more coins in the wicker basket on a Sunday morning, you know, the one at the end of the fucking broom handle that they shove under your face and make you feel bad about, rattle it in front of you. Put some pennies in, put a note, pop a note in. Do you know what I mean? Them nasty old women that take the kids into the back room and say weird shit to them for about half an hour. The pastor's name was Reverend G.W. Switzer, and both him and his wife, they both claim that this monster flew the sky at around 300 foot, I think it was, and seemed like it was writhing in pain, all the while wheezing like it couldn't breathe properly, like it was injured by something. Other witnesses as well claimed it was expelling heat down towards the ground, and it seems to me like it's quite possibly the world's most recent Cyclops sighting that I'm aware of anyway. But we are going to look into Cyclopses at some point to see if, well, I want to know if any one-eyed creature counts as a Cyclops, because I imagine it probably doesn't. Maybe they've got to always be like a humanoid troll-like creature. But the creature seemed to dissipate and vanish, only to return the next day, or at least maybe even, it was later that week. But sightings, as you can imagine, are recorded for this in quite a wide area, allegedly reporting the same facts from the sighting as well. And the fact that this sighting has lasted over, 130 odd years of data, this has lasted like that long, records of it is mental, considering it's only been seen like twice. So skeptics, there are some skeptics, not about invisible flying monsters, I'm probably not going to go into that, but skeptics of the Crawfordsville monster, if you like. They think it's a flock of birds known as killdeer, which is a cool name, but killdeer are these little, they look like a massive wagtail, basically, it looked like, maybe like a wading bird of some sort, but in my eyes, surely if there were a huge flock of killdeer flying around, it's very hard to believe that this is the first time that all these people living in this town have ever seen a flock of killdeer flying around. Surely they do that more than once. They don't just start doing that. That's mental to me. The idea, imagine, what do you call, is it muzzerings? Musings? Muzzers? What is it called when you get a flock of starlings flying round? It's got a name like that, I think. But that, I mean, I suppose it's got to just start on one day and they all go, this is fucking mint. Let's do this again tomorrow. Hey, I like the look of you. Do you want to fucking, hey, let's rub cloacas. That's what they're all saying when they're going, chip, 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 chip. They're just all flapping around going, let's rub cloacas together. Oh, I don't even care. Doesn't even matter. Doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl. Let's just rub cloacas. If we get an egg, we get an egg. Do you know what I mean? That's got to have started on one day, but it's very hard to believe that it started in 1891 in Indiana. Very hard to believe. The Kildare just heard the Starlings in Britain doing it, and they're like, hey, I've heard some stories, we should do this. What, you want to get your end away? Well, we need a party, don't we? Just throw a party. If you throw a party, you're bound, look, mate, you're bound to be able to finger a cloaca, or at least someone's cloaca if you just throw a party. That doesn't make any sense. Mental. Madness. So, it also doesn't go anywhere, though, like the idea that the Kildare were flying round like this. That doesn't explain a big glowing red eye that seemed to stay consistent with one end of the beast, regardless of where and how it moved. If that red glowing eye stayed to the left of this moving thing, then yeah, maybe. But that was never suggested in what I read. It implies that the eye moves with the Crawfordsville monster. It doesn't say it's just on the left-hand side it stayed glowing red. Then you'd be like, well, that's a bit suspicious. That's not an eye. That's the glow of something. Also, question, how does a flock of fast-flapping birds explain the expulsion of heat? Now, I've had a pigeon fly over my head, and you get a slight breeze when a pigeon flies over your head. Now imagine 1,000 or so pigeons flying over your head. Bigger breeze. Much, much bigger breeze. Very hard to imagine it to be a blast of, I suppose you call it, concentrated hot air at a bunch of witnesses. Witnesses that weren't even prepared to be looking up at the sky and they could feel the heat. Very hard to believe a bunch of birds would cause that heat and blast it down at you. That's a bit weird. Don't know what would cause that. I don't know what would cause that in a monster to expel the heat, but we used to say dragons could breathe fire. This is, for all intents and purposes, a flying serpent, like a dragon. So it's expelling heat, which could mean, you know, maybe it's a chemical reaction taking place, or maybe it's an atmospheric beast chemically absorbing things from the sky, and that creates heat and expels heat. I'm not sure. I really don't know. I'm not, again, I'll hold my hands up, guys. I'm not a scientist. It got explained away at the time, a little bit later, a few weeks later, maybe a week or a month later. They explained it away and blamed it on newly installed streetlights in the area, which is a cop-out in my eyes. They say that it confused the birds and disorientated them whilst they were flying together. But if you think about it in modern terms, that reeks of propaganda, doesn't it? It's a means of demonising modern technology. So maybe they'd installed electric streetlights, maybe. And all the people that were selling the oil and the people that used to come around and light the oil lanterns were like, hey, this is fucking up the birds, this. I'm losing a job here, and it's upsetting the birds. Yeah, it's upsetting the birds, and I'm losing a job, and I don't really have much else to do, and what am I going to do with this fucking penny farthing? You know, just, it's like how people, nowadays, they demonise electric vehicles, aeroplane usage, and this new tunnel travel that seems to be on the cards for the future. And even on a smaller scale, people demonise video games for its effects on the world, earphones for its effects on hearing, contactless payments for its effects on society. It still goes on to this day. And I feel like if we had a similar monster show itself now in modern times, we'd probably hear the modern media's mouthpieces on the morning news say, this is because of people using VPNs. That's what this is. If people weren't using VPNs, the signals wouldn't be in the sky causing this monster to appear. No real difference in my eyes. None at all. Is it possible that the lights replaced something, though, that kept the monsters away? Maybe the people that had always lived in Indiana, in this place, would burn a certain type of oil at a certain degree heat that kept this monster at bay. Maybe it repulsed the monster. Could the lights, this different type of light, Could that have disrupted the monster's ability to blend invisibly in the sky? Or was it the possible introduction of electricity creating a sort of electromagnetic field that stopped the invisible flying monster from using the atmosphere like it normally would, making atoms from the sky bind to the creature's skin, like when you do electrolysis in water in science at school? Maybe the chemicals from the oils being burnt in the previous times before it exposed itself, maybe it had learnt and evolved to be able to absorb that and eat from it. Maybe that was their sort of, instead of giving it the daft kids, the silly kids in the field to eat, they just burnt these chemicals and it would absorb that and then it wouldn't kill anyone. Or they thought, if we do this, it won't kill anyone, or it'll protect us against the other sky serpent, monster, one-eyed, purple dragon things. Maybe, but maybe we'll never know. Maybe we'll never know anything about them because they're invisible. We can't see them. No one believes anyone that can see them. So, that's it, mate. It's about all I could find on invisible flying monsters, IFMs. Now, if you feel like I did miss something, please let me know in the comments, or just leave a comment. It helps. Please leave a 5-star rating on the show as well, or like it. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple, download it. Join me on YouTube if you haven't, you know what I mean? It all helps spread the show. If you want more episodes and to support the show and get loads of exclusive episodes and the chance to watch me record these longer shows live on Patreon, I'm going to put the link in the description for you. Either way, I'll fucking see you in a bit, mate.